In New York City, under the watchful eyes of cameras and the gathering of diplomats during the United Nations General Assembly, a pivotal meeting unfolded. The United States and India, two of the largest democracies in the world, came together through their chief representatives, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Indian External Affairs Minister Subrahmanyam Jaishankar. Their handshake, their measured words, and even their silences spoke to the complex, layered relationship between Washington and New Delhi. The moment may appear ceremonial, two men walking into a room, posing for photographs, exchanging courtesies before the press. Yet diplomacy often reveals itself in such brief encounters. Each image, each gesture becomes a message sent not only to domestic audiences, but to rivals and allies alike. In this case, the images carried significance far beyond the room. They were symbols of a partnership both nations have spent decades building, a partnership rooted in security, economics, and the shared challenge of navigating a world in flux. For Marco Rubio, this was more than a routine diplomatic engagement. Just a day earlier, he had stood in Arizona, delivering remarks at the memorial service of activist Charlie Kirk. There, his voice had been solemn, his tone domestic, his message tailored to American political life. But less than 24 hours later, he was in New York, shifting focus to global strategy and foreign policy. That transition captures the dual role of America's senior diplomats, speaking to the people at home while negotiating the realities of the world abroad. For Subrahmanyam Jaishankar, the meeting was equally weighty. A seasoned diplomat with years of experience navigating Washington, Beijing, Moscow, and beyond, he represents India at a time when the country is stepping further into the role of global power. His presence alongside Rubio was a reminder that New Delhi is not a passive actor in world affairs, but a nation determined to shape outcomes in its neighborhood and far beyond. At stake in this meeting were multiple layers of policy. Officials close to the discussions indicated that topics range from defense cooperation to semiconductor supply chains, from stabilizing South Asia to crafting joint approaches at the United Nations. Technology featured prominently as both nations seek leadership in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and critical mineral access, fields that define not only economic futures, but national security itself. This partnership has been forged over decades of shifting dynamics. During the Cold War, Washington and New Delhi often found themselves at odds, India leaning toward Moscow, while the United States leaned into alliances against the Soviet Union. That history bred mistrust, but it also laid the groundwork for future realignments. By the early 2000s, the Nuclear Cooperation Agreement signaled a major turning point, bringing India closer to the West's technological and strategic orbit. Defense agreements in the following years deepened that cooperation, and by 2025, the US-India relationship had become one of the most important axes in global geopolitics. For the United States, India is not only a partner in trade and defense, but a counterbalance to China. Washington sees New Delhi as essential in the Indo-Pacific strategy, from maritime patrols in the Indian Ocean to the coordination of the Quad with Japan and Australia. For India, the partnership provides access to advanced technology, intelligence sharing, and diplomatic leverage against Beijing's growing assertiveness along the Himalayan border. The significance of this particular meeting lies not in dramatic announcements, but in continuity. Diplomacy is as much about maintaining presence as it is about breakthroughs. By standing together, Rubio and Jaishankar sent a message of reliability, that both nations remain committed to the relationship regardless of domestic political shifts. China looms large in the background. For Washington, competition with Beijing defines much of its global posture. For India, the memory of border clashes and the reality of trade dependency make relations with China fraught and cautious. Both nations recognize that a coordinated approach, balancing confrontation with diplomacy, is necessary. Their dialogue in New York likely touched upon how to align strategies without overstepping each other's red lines. Equally pressing is the Middle East. India depends heavily on Gulf energy, while the United States continues to recalibrate its commitments in the region. As crises deepen from Gaza to Yemen, Washington and New Delhi face choices about how to respond diplomatically and how to safeguard their own interests. Their shared concern over Iran's policies, Turkey's ambitions, and the fragile security architecture of the Gulf undoubtedly shaped parts of their conversation. The meeting also unfolded in the shadow of America's own shifting politics. Rubio's dual presence in Arizona and New York highlights how domestic political identity and foreign policy credibility are inseparable. For Indian leaders, the situation is similar. Jaishankar's diplomacy abroad is closely watched at home, where strength on the global stage feeds into the government's narrative of a rising India. In both democracies, foreign policy is never simply about foreign lands. It is also about domestic perception and electoral weight. Symbolism carried through every frame. The simple act of walking into a room together reminded audiences that diplomacy is alive and ongoing. The handshake reflected a bond tested through trade disputes, defense negotiations, and occasional policy disagreements. The posed photographs, circulated by global media, were more than formality. They were reassurance to allies and a signal to rivals that the US-India partnership endures. Behind closed doors, discussions may have been frank. Issues like tariffs, visa regulations, and India's balancing act with Russia present real friction. Yet the ability to sit down, to exchange perspectives, and to project unity outward remains valuable. Such meetings demonstrate that the world's two largest democracies are committed to talking through differences, not allowing them to calcify into divisions. The broader context of the United Nations General Assembly amplified the weight of this encounter. Diplomats and leaders from across the globe were present in New York. Every bilateral meeting became a piece of theatre, watched by rivals and allies for hints of shifting alliances. In this crowded calendar, Rubio's engagement with Jaishankar stood out, not for the spectacle, but for the enduring importance of the relationship it represents. Looking beyond the moment, the partnership is likely to shape global debates in technology governance, defense alignments, and climate negotiations. Washington and New Delhi share concerns over supply chain resilience, ensuring that rare earths and semiconductors remain accessible despite geopolitical disruptions. They also share an interest in countering disinformation, securing data flows, and establishing norms for artificial intelligence, all issues central to the coming decades. Critics may note the limits of this relationship. India continues to maintain ties with Russia, purchasing arms and energy, while the United States leads sanctions against Moscow. New Delhi's stance on global conflicts does not always align neatly with Washington's, but therein lies the test of diplomacy, whether two nations with different histories and priorities can still converge on shared goals. For audiences in both countries, the footage offered a glimpse into this evolving story. To many Indians, Jaishankar's presence alongside Rubio underscores India's rising status as a global player. To many Americans, Rubio's meeting reflects a broader strategy of cultivating alliances in an uncertain world. For the international community, the images are a reminder that the balance of power is increasingly multipolar, with the US-India axis forming one of its strongest pillars. In the end, this was not a day of treaties signed or dramatic announcements declared. It was a day of diplomacy in motion, quiet, deliberate, and essential, the kind of work that sustains alliances, shapes strategies, and prevents conflicts. The meeting of Rubio and Jaishankar will not dominate headlines for long, but it will echo through the policies, initiatives, and partnerships that follow. Diplomacy often moves at a slow pace. It is not measured in minutes, but in years, not in sound bites, but in relationships. And as the cameras captured these leaders walking, shaking hands, and posing, they captured more than a moment. They captured the continuation of a story that will define the Indo-Pacific and the global order for decades to come. Thus, September 22nd, 2025 will be remembered not for drama, but for diligence. A handshake in New York, a conversation behind closed doors, and a message to the world. The United States and India remain aligned, alert, and aware of the stakes. In a world shaped by rivalry and uncertainty, sometimes the most powerful statement is presence itself.
as Mr. Krishna.
No
With all the
questions.
trade
No
tensions
questions.
between the two countries.
No questions today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.